Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Ashley. Today we'll be learning how to do this simple bead sandals. So you're going to need your pair of slippers. You're going to need thread. As usual, I'm using 0.3. You're going to need some needles, beads, that's 0.5 millimeter beads, and then 0.6 beads. I'm using two colors, blue and white. You're going to need a plier. You're going to need a Byers, and then you're going to need that pair of scissors. You're going to need a blade, and then you'll need glue. This is what I have available, but usually I use Aces 1000, so whichever glue you have available, you can use that. So let's thread up our needle. Thread your needle up to how comfortable you can hold it, because if it's too short, you have to be joining it a lot. If it's too long, it's going to be tangling up. Mine is very long. I know it's going to be tangling up along the way. So we start with 4 beads. We're starting with the 5 millimeter beads first. So you start with 4 beads. Tie to make a knot. Tie again to make sure it's really secure. Pull hard, and then you pass your needle through a couple of beads to hide the knot in between beads, so that we can cut off our excess thread then. So you have to pull to make sure that the knot is really hidden in between beads. And then we'll use our blade to cut off our excess thread. Now, we're going to continue with 3 beads, 3 beads. We're going to need 16 of that. Tangling up thread, I told you. Three beads. So we need 16 of that. So go ahead and do that, and then I'll also do the rest off camera, and then we'll meet up when we've gotten to it. So now I have about 14, 15. I'm not sure, but it's not up to 16 yet. One, two, three, four. So that's 15. I'll add 3 more to make it 16. 16. Okay, so that's going to be for the side of the slippers. 16. And also I'm using a size 10 slippers, so if you are using a size 10 and a half, you might need 17. If you are using a size 9, you might need 15. So now that we've gotten to the 16, we want to work sideways. So instead of continuing with the top bead, we'll continue working from sideways, the sideways bead. So this is what we'll get. We need the whole thing to have a V shape. So instead of continuing from the top, now we're working sideways with 3 beads as usual. It doesn't matter which sideways bead you pick, actually, you're still going to get the same thing. Any of the sideways bead from the 16th down, you're still going to get the same shape. So the first one is 16. Now we're going to do 15. So this is 16, and then this is 15. 15, 16. So 15 is for the inside part of the slippers, and then the 16 is for the outer side of the slippers. Remember, I'm using a size 10. So if you're using a different size, your bead side length might increase or decrease. It depends on the size of your slippers. So that is it. Now we're going to do the back side of the sandals. We'll thread up a needle. We're still going to use the same process. 4 beads, 3, 3, and then 2. Same process. Since I've started, same process I've been using for practically everything. Three and 4 beads. So we'll tie, pull and tie again to secure it. Now we'll have to pass the needle through a couple of beads to hide the knots in between beads. Pull hard, and the knot is hidden in between beads. See? Pass the needle away from it a bit, about 1 or 2 more beads, then you cut off your excess thread. So now you're going to continue with 3 beads, 3 beads. It's advisable to cut off your excess thread. If you don't, it worries you whilst you are working. So you just cut it off once your knot is hidden in between beads. So for this one, we need a foundation bead of 20. So we're going to continue doing this until we get into the 20th one. We need 20 of that. So and then we are at our 20. So from here on, we're going to be working up, and then we want that kind of shape. So we're going to be leaving out the first and last beads. So we'll start working with the second bead up at the sideways. Sorry. So you pass your needle to any sideways you want here, and then you start with the middle bead, second bead from the first. So you leave the first bead out and start working with the second bead, and then when you get to the last bead, you leave that one out too. So we'll start with our 3 beads. So now this is what it was going to look like. You're already having that slant shape the moment you skip out the first bead. So continue with 2 beads. So you work until you get to the last one, and then you leave the last bead out. So this is the second row, and then it's almost ended. So work through it like that, and then when we get to the last bead, we'll leave that one out, and then we'll continue up. We'll send the needle all the way up again, skip out to the first bead, and then start working with the second bead. So we'll leave out that one and then work with the other one. Good. So that's the last bead we work on. We'll leave out the other one. Now we are up again. So we're going to leave out the first bead and then start working on the second bead. So 3 beads. And this is the third row. So we're going to continue like this until we get to the 5th row. We're going to continue skipping out the first and the last bead until we get to the 5th row. This is the 3rd row. So 2 more rows to go. we'll leave out that last bead again, and then send our needle up, leave out the first bead and start working on the second bead. And this is our fourth row. So you're just basically going to continue doing that until you get to the fifth row. So you see how slanted it is, and that's our fifth row. And then that's how far we want it to go. We are not going to continue going, leaving out first ones. Now we want it to be straight, so we're not leaving out the first bead or the last bead. We're working on them all. We're just going to continue working on them, no leaving out any beads. Just work on both first and last beads. This is the last bead. We are not leaving it out. We are still working on it. So add 2 more beads and work on the last bead. Initially we were leaving it out, but now we are not leaving it out. So from there we work all the way up, not leaving out first or last beads. We want it in a straight form now. You no longer need it to be slant because it needs to cover the back of your foot very well. So from here we just work it up straight. There's another one we do, and then we don't change the pattern when we'll get to the 5th one. You just work it all the way like that to the 7th one, but it's not this process. Hopefully next week I'll do a tutorial on that one. The process is not this one, so hopefully next week. This is the third row. After the fifth one, we ended with the fifth one. This is the third row we're working on. You will need about 6 or 7 rows altogether. It depends on the size you are working on actually. So I ended up doing 6 rows after the fifth one ended. That's the fifth one. So now I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. So in all, that's 11 rows all. So now I'm going to work sideways on the first middle bead. I'm done with the blue bead now, so we'll be using the 6mm beads. We'll start with 5 of it. Working on the first middle bead. It could be to the right or to the left. It doesn't really matter where you start. It could be to the right or to the left, but it must be the first middle bead out. Oh, my thread got tangled up. So you're going to continue 5, 5, 5 until you get to 9 of that. In total, you're supposed to have 10, but we're going to do 9 on this side and then 1 on the other side. So continue like that. But if you're using a size 10.5 or size 11, you might need 10 on this side and 1 on the other side, or you might need 11 on this side and then 1 on the other side. Always remember that the size of your slippers and the size of the foot of your customer determines the number of beads, like the number of bead rolls you make. So I'm just going to make 9 because it's a size 10. I'm sorry, I've got a cold. And that is our 9. So now we'll just pass the needle back through a couple of beads and then make a knot, and then pass it through a couple of beads, hide our knot, and then we'll cut off the excess thread left. Cut off your excess thread. Now that is it. We're not done though. We're making 2 of that, but joining it together to make it look like 1. So going to the next middle bead from the one we used. So we'll pass our needle through a couple of beads to hide the knot, and then so we get there. Make a knot. Now we'll have to pass it through a couple of beads to hide our knot, and then we'll pass the needle all the way to the second bead from where we started the first row. There. Now we're going to be adding 3 and then passing it through the 2 of the other one we just made to join them. 2 like that, and then we'll pass it through the same middle bead again, pass it through the next 3 beads we just added, and then we're going to add 3 again. Pass it through the first one, like that. 3. So we're going to continue like that, adding 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th one. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 until we get to the 9th Remember, once you add 3, you are supposed to join it to the other 2 of the other one to get 5, sorry, to get the 5 that you need. And by doing that, it joins it to the other one, making it look like 1. So let's do that until we get to the 9th one. And this is our 9th one. There. So we'll make a knot. That's it. Make a knot, pass it through a couple of beads down, and then hide our knot. Then we can cut off the excess thread and then work at the other end. I know my voice might be distracting, so I'm sorry. So cut off our excess thread, and then we'll go and work at the other end of it. So this is it for the side, and then at the other end, first 2 beads, that's what we'll be working on, the first one and the second one. When I say first and second, we're counting down, so this will be the first one, counting down first and second, but counting up the 10th and 11th one. So 5 beads. Pass it through the same bead again, and then pass it through the sideways 2, and then we'll add 3 beads, and then we'll go pass it to the second blue bead, right, and then pass it through the same 2 beads again. Now we're just going to pass it through a couple of the white beads we've just made, just to make it stronger, to give it a firm hold. So we'll just pass it through a couple of times, and then we'll make a knot, and then pass it through a couple of blue beads to hide our knot. And that is it. So we're going to stitch the 16th the 16th one we made. When we started with 16, then 15. So when we want to stitch, we make sure that we put in the 16th on the outer side of the slippers. That's 15, so this side should be the 16. Yes, so this side is the 16. So this side, it's supposed to be at this outer side, and then the 15 is supposed to be at the inner side. So we're going to join our thread and needle to it. We'll pass it through a couple of beads down, and then send it all the way up and start stitching with it. As usual, I still find it very hard stitching on a table, leaving the slippers on a table stitching. So I'm just going to show you how I do it, and then I'll go stitch it off camera. So when you get to this bead, you push your needle down using your plier. You need to take your time though, because if you use so much pressure, your needle might break. So you pass it up to the other side of the same bead, that way. Oh, sorry, that way. Pass it through the same bead again, and then you need to pass it through the next middle bead. As usual, we are stitching in between middle beads, so when you pass it through the next middle bead, you stitch it down, stitch it up, pass it through the same middle bead to the next, stitch it down, stitch it up, pass it through the same middle bead to the next. That's how we do the stitching. So you stitch down, sorry, tangled up, stitch down, stitch up to the other side of the same middle bead, other side of the same middle bead, sorry, and then you pass it through the same middle bead again to the next middle bead. One, two. So that's the next middle bead. You stitch it down. And then you want to stitch it up from the opposite side of where you stitch it down at the same middle bead. Sorry, my thread was too long, so it keeps tangling up. Ouch. Okay. So you stitch it up to the other side of the same middle bead. You pass it through that same middle bead to the next middle bead. So you stitch that way all the way to the end. I went ahead and stitched the rest off camera because it's hard to stitch on the table. So that way, stitch from one side of the middle bead down, and then you stitch from the other side of it up, and then you pass it through the same middle bead. There. So you pass your needle through a couple of beads, make a knot, pass it through a couple of beads to hide your knot, and then you cut off your excess thread. And then you go ahead and do the same thing for the other side of the slippers. You cut off your excess thread. So I made mine too long. That's why it was tangling up. So I'm going to use the same thing to stitch the other side. So I'm going to pass it through a couple of beads away from where I'm going to be doing the stitches, and then pass it all the way there. You don't want to start with your knot at the exact point where you want to do your stitch. It might remove. So stitch from the middle bead down, stitch up to the other side of the same middle bead, and then you pass it through the same middle bead to the next middle bead. Same middle bead, then 1, 2, that's the next middle bead. Then you stitch it down, and then the other side of the same middle bead, you stitch it up. Stitch it up, pass it through to the next middle bead. So you're going to continue this way all the way down. I'm going to do it off camera again. So all the way down here till here we are. Down, and then you stitch it up to the other side of the same middle bead, and then you pass it through the same middle bead to the next middle bead. Stitch down, up again to the other side of the same middle bead, pass it through the same middle bead, and then you pass it through a couple of beads, make your knot, pass it through a couple of beads again, hide your knot, and then cut off your excess thread, and that will be it. Now I'm going to cut the down of my slippers so that when I make my stitches on top, this the thread is hidden in between the cuts that I made. So I pick a slippers and I cut all the way around. When your thread doesn't show, the beads will not remove until the slippers is pulled. The slippers itself is pulled. The beads won't remove. So I make a cut like this, and then when I stitch, the thread is hidden in between the cuts. Now make sure the two that you made, the one that you made at the other side, is always at the outer side, because you're going to wrap it out. No, you don't wrap in. So you face it that way. Sorry. So unlike the other one where we stitched on the middle beads up, this one we're just going to stitch on the down beads. So it's going to be very easy. All down beads, you stitch in between all down beads, from one bead down, bring it up, pass it through the other bead down, bring it up, pass it through the same bead down, bring it up, pass it through the bead down. That's how you're going to stitch it until you get to the other side. So when you put your bead on your slippers and then you can't remember the measurement, just stick the needle there so that it makes a hole, so that when you want to start stitching, you know where to start from. You know the measurements, because the needle will make a point on the slippers where it indicates this is where you're supposed to start from. I keep removing my needle because I didn't get it to pass through the line that I made. That's why I kept removing it. So now that is it. So you stitch down, stitch up, there you go, pass it through the bead again, and then stitch down. The first and the last bead, you always want to make sure that they are extra firm and secure. So I pass it through it like 2 times, and then I just stitch through the others. Sorry, stitching on the table is hard. I usually just put it on my laps and stitch, so it's easy and faster. So you just pass it through, bead stitch. When you stitch, you make sure your needle appears in the mark that you made. That way your lines, the line that you made. That way the thread will be hidden in between the cuts, and then it won't be showing. That way. So you pass it through the cut, up, and then pass it through the next bead down, next bead, and then you stitch down. You bring it up, you pass it through the next bead, and you stitch down. Bring it up, pass it through the next bead, and you stitch down, and that's just it until you reach the last bead. You do that twice. So you bring it up like this, and then you put it through the next bead, and then you stitch it down. So this is it. So let's stitch around and then meet at the end. So here we are. Stitch it up. Pass it through the next bead down. Stitch it down. And you stitch it up. This time we're not bringing it down again because that was the last stitch for the last bead. So when you bring it up like this, you need to pass it through a couple of beads away from the slippers. Sorry. So pass it through a couple of beads up away from the slippers, then you go make your knot somewhere in between, and then you pass it through a couple of beads again, hide your knot, and then you cut off your excess thread. And that's practically it. Actually, this side of the slippers, stitching this side of the slippers is much easier than stitching the top. Stitching the back is very easy than stitching the top, but I know most people will think stitching the top is easy. And then we'll cut off our excess thread, and then that will be it. So now we're going to cut our bias, and then see, since we made this thing 2 in 1, we'll have to cut our bias 2 for each band. Yeah. So 2, 1 for the down, tie it, make it a bow however you want, tie it however you want, just make it cute, and then use the next one and tie the up one. Make another bow, and there you go. And that will be it. So now we'll level with this side. So you take this and then you measure it against the slippers where you've done the stitching. You see that this thread didn't show at the down, so you measure it and then cut. I already had this one down, so I didn't need cutting. So you just use your glue and then you glue that. This is the glue I have around, but usually use E6000, any glue that you think it's okay for you. This was what I have available. I used it for something else, so it was just around, so I'm using it. But you use any other glue you think it's okay for you, it's fine. You can even use fabric glue and it will stick. And there, you just glue it all the way around from the beginning of the stitching to the end of the stitch. And that is it. We have our cute bead sandals. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I appreciate it. Please remember to subscribe, like, and then leave a comment.